The bodies of her sons swayed in the relentless heat, abandoned by the world, stripped of dignity. No burial, no mourning rites, only the slow decay under an unforgiving sky. But Rizpah did not leave. She stood beneath them, guarding the dead, refusing to let time erase them. For months, she fought off scavengers, endured the storm, and bore witness to a grief so fierce, it silenced kings. Would her unyielding sorrow move the hand of justice? Would her silent protest be heard by heaven? Night after night, Rizpah stood beneath the lifeless bodies of her sons, refusing to leave, refusing to forget. The world had abandoned them, left them to rot under the open sky, stripped of dignity, denied burial. Yet she remained, a lone figure against the injustice of kings. She did not cry out in anger. She did not demand retribution. Instead, she fought in silence, chasing away the vultures by day, guarding against wild beasts by night. Her grief became a protest, her endurance a prayer. And though no one had listened before, her suffering spoke louder than words. The question was, would it be heard? Would her unwavering devotion shake the heart of a king? Would heaven itself take notice? Her story is one of fierce love, quiet defiance, and a strength that outlasted the storms. It is the story of a mother who refused to let death erase the ones she loved. And it is a story that demands to be told. The air in Gibeah was thick with judgment. It did not carry the scent of war nor the cries of battle, it was quieter, crueler. The kind of reckoning that did not come with swords drawn but with words spoken in solemn chambers. The famine had stretched across Israel for 3 relentless years. Crops withered under the weight of drought, children cried from hunger, and the people murmured that perhaps God had turned his face from them. So King David sought an answer. He stood before the priests, before the ark, searching for the voice of the Almighty. When the answer came, it was not what he had expected. This famine is because of Saul's bloodshed, the Lord's voice echoed in the prophet's heart. Because of the Gibeonites who were slain without cause. The weight of those words settled upon David. Long before his reign, when Saul still wore the crown, the king had broken a covenant, an ancient peace between Israel and the Gibeonites, a treaty that should have lasted for generations. But Saul, in his zeal, had sought to erase them, spilling blood that had never been meant for slaughter. And now, years after his death, the land still wept for justice. David summoned the remnants of the Gibeonites, their faces lined with bitterness, their wounds etched deep into history. He spoke of the famine, of the Lord's revelation, and asked, "What shall I do for you, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" They did not ask for land or wealth. They asked for blood. "Give us 7 sons of Saul," they said, "that we may hang them before the Lord." A silence settled over the palace. The price of justice had been named, and it was one that could not be undone. David swallowed his sorrow, knowing that the sins of the past demanded retribution. He spared Mephibosheth, the crippled son of Jonathan, honoring his oath to his beloved friend. But 7 others, descendants of Saul, princes in their own right, were chosen. Among them were the sons of Rizpah. She was a concubine, neither a queen nor a wife, but a woman whose heart had been carved by sacrifice. And now, that heart would be shattered. The day of judgment arrived with ruthless precision. Rizpah stood among the gathered crowds as her sons were led forward. She wanted to scream, to plead with the king who had once been a man after God's own heart. But the sentence had already been spoken. The 7 were taken to the mountain. The executioners did not hesitate. Ropes tightened. Bodies fell still. And then, the world moved on. The people turned away. The court returned to its affairs. The nation carried on, accepting that blood had been shed as if it were a mere debt paid in full. But Rizpah did not move on. She remained where the bodies hung, her feet sinking into the dust beneath them. The sun burned against her skin, but she did not flinch. The wind howled through the valley, but she did not retreat. Her sons had been taken. And so she vowed, no beast, no scavenger, no thief would claim them while she still had breath in her lungs. She would keep vigil, day and night, until justice was truly met. The first night was the hardest. Rizpah stood beneath the bodies, the smell of death heavy in the air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rustling of the dry grass and the distant cries of birds circling overhead. The sun had long since set, leaving her with nothing but the glow of the stars and the weight of grief pressing against her chest. Her body ached, exhaustion tugging at her limbs, but she did not move. She could not. They had been her sons. Her flesh. Her blood. And though the king had condemned them, though the people had accepted their deaths as necessary, she refused to let them be forgotten. A sudden sound split the air. Wings. A vulture descended, its sharp talons scraping against the rocky ground. It hopped forward, its beady eyes fixed on the limp forms swaying in the wind. Rizpah inhaled sharply. No. She grabbed a long branch and swung it fiercely, the force enough to send the scavenger screeching away. But it wasn't the last. They would come again. All of them, vultures, jackals, hyenas, the merciless creatures that fed on the dead. The beasts did not care for dignity, did not honor the lives that had once been. They only saw flesh, prey to be devoured. But Rizpah would not allow it. She kept watch. Every hour. Every night. Her arms grew weary from swinging away the scavengers, her feet swollen from standing guard. The days burned her skin, the night sent chills deep into her bones. Yet she remained. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The city moved on, the people forgot, but Rizpah did not. And slowly, quietly, her grief began to shift something greater than herself. Rumors spread. The traders passing by whispered of the lone woman on the mountain, the one who refused to abandon the dead. Fishermen spoke of her in hushed voices, uncertain whether to pity or fear her. The king himself, far away in the palace, began to hear the name Rizpah murmured among his people. What could move a mother to stand watch so long? Why did she refuse to leave? And could a grief so powerful shake the heart of a king? The palace was quiet when word reached David. It had begun as whispers, merchants and travelers speaking of a lone woman on the mountain, her form barely distinguishable from the stones beneath her feet. A widow. A mother. A figure so steadfast in grief that even the wild beasts had come to fear her presence. Rizpah. Her name had drifted through the courts of Joppa and beyond, pressing itself into the ears of those who had once dismissed the executions as necessary. David listened, his brow furrowed. He had ordered justice. He had sought to right Saul's wrongs, believing the bloodshed would end the famine. But now, months had passed, and the rains had yet to return. The land remained parched, the cries of the people still filled the streets. Had he misjudged the weight of justice? He rose from his throne, pacing the chamber as the reports continued. She has not left them, a servant murmured. She watches even through the storms. David exhaled, closing his eyes. A mother keeping vigil over her dead. A love that refused to surrender, even in the face of decay, even when the world told her to move on. Had he been blind to it? Had he sentenced them to dishonor, thinking their deaths alone would be enough to cleanse the land? Something stirred deep within him. He could not let it remain. Not like this. Without hesitation, he ordered his men to ride to the mountain. And when he arrived, what he saw shook him more than he expected. Horses slowed as they approached the mountain. Dust rose in spirals beneath their hooves, settling into the dry air as King David dismounted. The men who rode with him exchanged uneasy glances, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords, not out of fear, but out of something they could not name. A tension. A weight. Because before them, draped in rags, stood a woman against the endless sky. Rizpah. She had not left them. Her hair was stiff with dust, tangled from the wind that never ceased at this height. Her face was marked, etched with exhaustion, sorrow, determination. Her skin bore the scorch of the sun, her arms bruised from swinging away the scavengers who came each night to claim what remained. And above her, the bodies still hung. David inhaled sharply. The sight alone sent a tremor through him, not just the decay, not just the stench of death, but the reality of what he had allowed. He had called it justice. But was this justice? Rizpah met his gaze. She did not bow. She did not beg. She only stood. A mother, unwavering. A guardian of grief. And suddenly, David saw. The executions had been meant to restore balance. To bring restitution for Saul's sins. To end the famine and cleanse the land. Yet the rains had not come. Not because the deaths had been insufficient. But because mercy had been absent. David swallowed hard, tearing his gaze away from the sight of Rizpah's ruined form. Then, his voice was firm. Clear. Take them down. The bodies were taken down at last. The ropes fell slack, and the men carried them from the mountain, their faces tight with solemnity. There was no celebration, no relief, only the quiet weight of grief settling over them like dust in the wind. Rizpah stood motionless as she watched, her breath held, her limbs too weary to tremble. Her vigil had ended. But her heart still burned. She had stood for months, fighting off beasts, enduring storms, refusing to let time erase her sons. And now, in the presence of a king, they would finally receive the dignity they had been denied. David turned to her. He did not speak. There was nothing to say, no words that could undo what had been done. But she met his gaze, searching for something in his eyes. And for the first time, she saw it. Remorse. Not just for her sons, but for the weight of justice without mercy. The king had ruled with an iron hand, believing that vengeance could balance the scales of God. But Rizpah had shown him otherwise. Honor was not in the bloodshed. It was in the remembrance. And so, David carried the bodies, not just of her sons, but of Saul and Jonathan as well, and gave them a proper burial in the tomb of their ancestors. And then, heaven opened. The rains came. Not as a trickle, but in torrents, washing away the dust, the sorrow, the stains of death. The famine was over. Because justice had finally been tempered by mercy. And all of Israel knew, it was Rizpah's grief that had moved the heart of a king. The rains had washed away the dust, but the memory of Rizpah's vigil remained. Joppa whispered of her endurance. Merchants spoke of the woman who defied kings with nothing but grief. Fishermen told of the mother whose sorrow had opened the heavens. And slowly, the nation began to change. Rizpah had not sought power, nor justice for herself. She had only fought for dignity, long after the world had turned away, long after the men who had sentenced her sons forgot their names. Yet in the end, she had moved a king. She had shifted a nation. David, now burdened with the weight of what he had allowed, walked through the palace with the silence of a man newly shaped by revelation. His advisers watched, waiting for the next decree. But instead of war, instead of judgment, David ordered remembrance. He gathered his scribes and told them to write, not of his victories in battle, not of his wisdom as ruler, but of the woman who had shown him what justice truly meant. Rizpah's name would not be erased. Her grief would be honored. And in the years that followed, whenever the people spoke of mercy, of endurance, of faith that refused to be broken, they whispered her name. Rizpah. The mother who stood when no one else would. Rizpah did not ask to change a nation. She did not demand justice, nor did she plead before the king's court. She only stood, against time, against suffering, against the silence that threatened to erase her sons from history. Her grief became a protest. Her endurance became a prayer. And in the end, she was heard. David gave her sons the dignity they had been denied, burying them alongside the fallen king. The famine ceased. The skies opened. And Israel, once hardened in its pursuit of retribution, learned that justice without mercy was never the answer. Rizpah did not seek power. She did not command armies. She did not hold titles. Yet, she moved a king. She reshaped a nation. Her name remained, whispered among the widows, the broken, and the forgotten. Because Rizpah's story was not just about grief, it was about faith that refuses to surrender, about love so fierce it demands remembrance. And that is why we tell it. Rizpah's story is not just one of loss, it is one of defiant love, of faith that stands unshaken in the face of injustice. She did not have a voice in the king's court, but her grief spoke louder than words. She did not wield power, but her endurance moved a nation. And because she stood, mercy prevailed. Her vigil was a testimony that even in silence, persistence can stir the hearts of kings. Even in sorrow, faith can shift the heavens. Her legacy is one of unwavering devotion, a reminder that justice is not found in vengeance, but in dignity, remembrance, and love that refuses to fade. How does Rizpah's endurance challenge the way you see justice and mercy? Pass this story on to someone who needs to know their grief is seen by God. Stand for the forgotten. Honor the overlooked. Refuse to let time erase the dignity of those who have suffered. Her name was nearly lost to history.